She heard everything she was never meant to hear. She heard the king order his son to forget her, and his silence hurt more than any wound could. While the bells announced the death of his father, she fled, pregnant with the future Alpha King. When he discovered it, it was already too late. The new king ran into the forest, howling for her, believing he had been abandoned and betrayed. Far from there, with trembling hands resting over her own belly, she swore she would protect her child from a kingdom that would never accept her. She had to do things to save them both. She danced in a tavern just to put bread on the table. Until, on an ordinary night, the king entered only to spend the evening, and froze when he recognized the very woman he had sworn never to love again. What he did not expect was that, when he followed her, he would open the door of that small house and find his own eyes staring back at him. Chapter 1. The castle stone held secrets no servant dared speak aloud. Alyssa ran her fingertips along the cold surface of the wall as she crossed the side corridor, the one few used after nightfall. Her heart pounded wildly, just as it always did whenever she knew he would be waiting. She should not be there. A servant did not wander royal corridors after midnight without raising suspicion. But Caius had a way of making the impossible feel inevitable, of turning the forbidden into something necessary. The door creaked as she pushed it open, and there he was, the Crown Prince of Drakenshire, future king, leaned against the mahogany table with his arms crossed, and that stare that undressed her without ever touching her skin. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said, his deep voice echoing through the small room. "I thought the same." Alyssa closed the door behind her, her hands trembling slightly. The guard on the third floor changed shifts. He almost saw me. Caius took 2 steps toward her, and the whole world seemed to shrink. He had that ability, filling any room completely just with his presence. "Almost is not enough to keep me away from you." When he touched her, placing his hand on the curve of her waist and pulling her against his body, Alyssa felt that familiar wave of heat spread through her veins. No matter how many times they found themselves like this, the sensation was always overwhelming, always new. "My father is worse," Caius murmured into her hair, his warm breath brushing her temple. "The healers say it's only a matter of weeks." Alyssa lifted her face to look at him, and she saw something rarely present in the prince's eyes. Fear. Not the fear of ordinary men, but the quiet terror of someone who knows his life is about to change in an irreversible way. "And when that happens," she began, but she could not finish the sentence. "When that happens, you will be mine." Caius held her face between his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I don't care what they say. I don't care if the entire council rises against me. You are mine, Alyssa, my mate, my choice." She wanted to believe those words, but there was a brutal difference between a prince and a king. Caius could make promises now, while he did not yet carry the weight of the crown. But later, when the elders gathered to speak of alliances, of bloodlines, of what was best for the kingdom. "You're overthinking," he said, recognizing the expression she made whenever doubt consumed her. "I can see it in your eyes." "Then stop giving me reasons to doubt." The words slipped out sharper than she intended, but Caius only smiled. That slow smile that made something coil deep inside her. "When I become king," he whispered against her lips, each word cut by his unsteady breath, "the first thing I will do is declare you mine, before the whole kingdom." They remained like that for hours, tangled in the shadows of that forgotten room. 3 weeks passed like leaves swept away by the autumn wind. The king was fading in his chambers, surrounded by healers and counselors whispering about the transition of power. Alyssa continued her duties, cleaning halls, changing bed linens. But something had changed. For the past 5 days, her body had been betraying her in unfamiliar ways, sudden dizziness that forced her to lean against the walls, morning sickness that left her pale and trembling. It took her 2 days to recognize the truth when it struck her like lightning. She was pregnant, carrying the child of Caius. Alyssa placed a hand over her still flat belly, her eyes burning with tears of joy and terror intertwined. A child. She needed to tell him. Immediately. Alyssa was finishing her work in the adjoining chambers near the royal room when she heard voices. The door was slightly open, and she instantly recognized the king's rough voice. "My son." The king coughed, a wet, painful sound. "You must forget that girl." Alyssa froze. Her fingers tightened around the cloth she was holding until her knuckles turned white. "Father, let's not discuss this now," Caius replied, sounding exhausted. "You need to rest. There will be no rest until you promise me. That servant, she is not suitable. The kingdom needs alliances, needs strength. A simple maid would ruin our bloodline, stain the crown's reputation." Every word felt like a blow. She always knew the king would never approve. But hearing those words aloud, spoken so coldly, was too painful to bear. "Father, promise me, Caius. Promise that when I am gone, you will do what is right for Drakenshire. Promise you will forget that childish fantasy." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Alyssa held her breath, waiting, silently begging for Caius to say no. "Rest, father. We will talk about this when you are stronger." It was not a refusal, but it was not the defense she needed. Alyssa ran, dropping the fabric onto the floor, her tears already streaming down her cheeks. Her bare feet barely touched the cold stones as she crossed corridors, descended staircases, fleeing that conversation as if she could escape the truth it revealed. She had barely reached the servants' corridor when a voice stopped her. "My dear girl, why such haste?" She turned and found Counselor Maddox, an older man with narrow eyes and a smile that never fully reached his face. He always made her uneasy, as if he were constantly evaluating everything around him. "Forgive me, Counselor. I was just finishing my duties." "With tears down your face?" He stepped closer, and Alyssa instinctively stepped back. "Or is it because you heard things you should not have heard?" Her blood turned to ice. "I did not. Let us spare the lies, my dear." Maddox clasped his hands behind his back, his sinister smile widening. "I have eyes everywhere in this castle. Eyes that noticed your morning dizziness, your sickness." Alyssa felt the world collapsing beneath her feet. "You are carrying the prince's child," Maddox continued, as if discussing the weather. "And that, my dear, is a considerable problem for the kingdom's plans." "That is none of your concern," she managed to say, though her voice shook. "Oh, but it is. Anything that affects the crown is my concern." He pulled a heavy pouch from inside his robes, and Alyssa heard the clinking of gold coins. "This should be enough for you to start a new life, far from here, far from the prince who will soon be king and will need to make choices a simple maid cannot understand." "You're offering me money to disappear?" Alyssa whispered in disbelief. "I'm offering a solution that benefits everyone. You will have means to raise your child. The prince will fulfill his destiny without complications. The kingdom will remain strong. And if I refuse?" The smile vanished. "Then you will learn that accidents happen with alarming frequency in this castle, especially to disobedient servants, and it would be a shame if something happened to you, or to the child you carry." The threat was unmistakable. Alyssa looked at the gold, then at Maddox's impassive face, and felt the trap close around her like a wolf's jaws. She was alone, pregnant, with a powerful man threatening not only her life, but the life of her unborn child. Caius was with his dying father, facing pressures she could barely imagine. Even if she ran to him now, even if she told him everything, how could she know he would choose her? She had just heard the king demand he forget her. She had heard Caius's silence where a refusal should have been. "I do not have all night," Maddox said, shaking the pouch. With trembling hands, Alyssa took the gold. The weight was considerable, more money than she would see in years of work. Enough to sustain a child, at least for a while. "A wise decision," Maddox said with satisfaction. "I advise you to leave before dawn. And my dear, if you value your life and your child's, never return." He vanished down the corridor, leaving Alyssa alone with the gold that felt like stones in her hands, and the crushing sense that she had just sold not only her future, but her soul. That night, the castle drowned in mourning. The king died shortly after sunset, and the bells began to toll, announcing grief and the dawn of a new era. Servants rushed through corridors preparing funeral rites. Counselors gathered to plan the coronation, and amid all that chaos, no one noticed a young maid packing her few belongings and slipping out the side door before sunrise. Alyssa looked back only once, seeing the castle towers rising against the still dark sky, and laid a hand over her belly where the child of the future Alpha King grew. "Forgive me," she whispered, unsure whether she spoke to her child, to Caius, or to herself. Then she turned and walked toward the dense forest surrounding the kingdom, each step taking her farther from the only man she had ever loved, the only place she had ever called home. Pregnancy made it impossible for her to shift into a wolf, so she traveled in human form, her feet bleeding inside worn boots, her weakened body protesting the arduous journey. She avoided all nearby villages, fearing someone might track her, and slept hidden among the trees, surviving on berries and stream water. In the castle, Caius was buried beneath responsibilities. His father's burial required 3 full days of rituals, followed by preparations for his own coronation. He barely had time to breathe, much less search for Alyssa. When he finally found a moment and went to the servants' quarters, he discovered she was gone. "Has anyone seen her?" he demanded, his heart racing with a fear he could not name. The other maids shook their heads, avoiding his gaze. No one knew, or no one would say. Caius turned the entire castle upside down. He questioned guards, servants, anyone who could have seen Alyssa. But she had vanished like smoke, without a trace. Then Maddox approached him, his face marked by a mask of false concern. "My king," he began, using a title Caius was still growing accustomed to hearing. "I regret to bring troubling news, but I believe I must inform you about the girl you seek." "Speak," Caius ordered, his voice rough. "Alyssa. She came to me a few days ago. Asked for money. A considerable amount." Maddox paused, as if the next part pained him. "She told me she had a man. What she described as the love of her life. Someone from her home village. She said she needed to see him urgently." Every word was a dagger. "You're lying," Caius said, though even to his own ears his voice sounded hollow. "I wish it were a lie, my king, but I gave her the money she requested. She has always been so dedicated, helping far more than required. I could not deny her aid. She had to leave. I am sorry it did not give you time to speak with her." Caius stood there, trying to process it, trying to fit that story into everything he knew about Alyssa. But doubt had already been seeded over the past weeks. The nagging insecurity about whether a servant could truly love a prince, or if there had been something more calculated behind those gentle eyes. She had fled without a word, without an explanation, without even attempting to speak to him. What else could it be but betrayal? Something inside Caius shattered. A wild, desperate fury climbed his throat like molten fire, burning everything in its path. He said nothing more to Maddox, and instead strode down the corridors, his steps growing faster, more uneven. By the time he reached the outer courtyard, the shift was already taking hold. His bones snapped and reshaped, muscles expanded, skin gave way to fur black as a moonless night. Within seconds, where a man had stood, now towered a massive wolf with eyes glowing like liquid silver in the dim morning light. Caius ran. He ran harder than he ever had, his powerful paws devouring the ground as he leapt past the castle gates and into the dense forest. He needed to find her, needed to track her scent, confront her, force her to look into his eyes and repeat those lies about another man. But when he stopped to scent the air, desperate for that fragrance he knew as well as his own name, there was nothing. Days had passed since she left. Rain had fallen, winds had blown, and every trace of her scent had been erased like dust. Caius howled, long and anguished, the sound echoing through the forest and sending birds into flight. He collapsed onto the damp forest floor, his heavy breath shaking his massive body. And there, in the lonely silence of the woods, as the sun began to rise, a memory struck him with devastating force. That night, in their secret place, Caius could not take his eyes off her. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You are perfect," he corrected, pulling her into his arms. Alyssa laughed, that soft sound he treasured. "Liar. I'm just a servant with calloused hands and unruly hair." "You are mine," Caius said. He kissed her beneath the moonlight, watching over them. He laid her gently on the soft grass, his hands exploring every curve, every inch of exposed skin. Alyssa arched beneath him, her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as she whispered his name. "I love you," she told him. "I love you so much it hurts." "Then let me heal that pain," Caius replied, his voice rough with emotion. They became one beneath the benevolent moon, their bodies moving in perfect harmony, in a dance as ancient as time itself. When they finally lay side by side, their breath still unsteady, Caius pulled Alyssa against his chest and held her as if she might disappear if he loosened his embrace. "Promise you will never leave me," he asked, kissing the top of her head. "I promise," Alyssa whispered without hesitation. "I am yours. Always." And he had believed her, with every fiber of his being. The wolf in the forest opened his eyes, the memory dissolving and leaving only the harsh reality behind. Those promises had been lies, and he had been foolish enough to give her his heart completely, unprotected, unquestioned. Caius rose slowly, shaking the damp leaves from his fur. When he looked up, the sun was already high, and he knew he had to return. He had a kingdom to rule. But as he ran back toward the castle, Caius made himself a vow. Never again would he open his heart in that way. Never again would he allow anyone to get close enough to destroy him so completely. Alyssa had made her choice, and Caius would make his. Alyssa's journey had been an endless nightmare, but when she found a small, isolated village hidden among mist-covered hills, she managed to buy a shack, so humble it barely deserved to be called a home, yet just enough for her to give birth and raise her child. Ivor was born, but the first years living there were a constant battle for survival. The gold Maddox had given her seemed like a fortune at first, but Alyssa watched the coins dwindle with growing dread. What would she do when they were gone? How would she provide for her son? By the time Ivor turned 5 years old, the gold had run out. Alyssa found a job at the local tavern, a busy establishment that served travelers and merchants passing through the region. The work was exhausting, serving drinks and cleaning tables from dawn until late into the night, yet the pay barely covered the most basic food. Ivor was a bright child, curious-eyed and endlessly energetic. As he grew, Alyssa saw more and more of Caius in him. Every resemblance was both a blessing and a curse. Alyssa loved her son more than her own life. but looking at him was also looking at the man she had been forced to leave behind. "Mom, can I have more bread?" Ivor asked one evening, his wide eyes fixed on the small piece she had placed on his plate. Alyssa looked at her own plate, empty except for an even smaller crumb. She had given almost everything to him, as she did every night. "Of course, my love." She pushed half of her portion toward him, ignoring the hunger gnawing at her own stomach. It was then that Marjorie, one of the tavern dancers, approached Alyssa. She was a woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. "Alyssa, may I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." Alyssa wiped her hands on her apron. "I've noticed that that things have been difficult." Marjorie hesitated. "And I've also noticed that you are extraordinarily beautiful. People stop to stare when you walk across the room." Alyssa frowned, not understanding where the conversation was heading. "What I'm trying to say is that our group needs another dancer. The pay is 3 times what you earn now. It would be enough for you and your boy to live comfortably." Alyssa's first instinct was to refuse. Dancing for drunk men, being looked at that way, wearing revealing clothes. "I need to think about it." "Of course." That night, Alyssa lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of the shack. 3 times more. It meant real food on the table. She wasn't foolish. She knew dancing could attract unwanted attention from men who would assume she was available for more than entertainment. But she had her pride, her dignity. And above all, she had the special oil all she-wolves knew, the one that completely masked a wolf's natural scent. Some dancers used it to avoid getting into trouble. If she used the oil, no man would be able to track her by scent. They wouldn't be able to find her once she stepped off the stage. 3 days later, Alyssa accepted the offer. The first weeks were difficult. She had to learn the movements, the choreography, how to move in a way that entertained without appearing awkward. But Alyssa had always been naturally graceful, and soon she was dancing with a fluidity that made the tavern's customers stop drinking just to watch. Before every performance, she applied the oil generously to every inch of exposed skin. The fragrance was neutral, almost non-existent, but completely effective at masking her scent. It was her protection, her shield against men who might want more than just to look. And it worked. Men tried approaching her after performances, offering money, gifts, promises. But without her scent, without that primal connection smell created, it was easy for Alyssa to decline politely and disappear. Money began to come in. Ivor had food on the table every night. Alyssa even managed to buy a few used books to teach him how to read. "Why do you dance, Mom?" Ivor asked one evening, his 7 years making him increasingly curious about everything. "Because it's beautiful," Alyssa answered carefully. "And because it allows me to take care of you. I like when you dance here at home," he said with a smile. And she danced for him sometimes. Softer, gentler movements. Just a mother entertaining her child. Those were the moments Alyssa loved most. Just her and Ivor, the rest of the world disappearing beyond their little home. Now, 7 years later, hundreds of miles away, Caius ruled Drakenshire with a firm hand and a frozen heart. 7 years on the throne had changed him. He was no longer the idealistic prince. He was a pragmatic king who understood that difficult decisions had to be made, that alliances mattered more than feelings, that the kingdom always came first. His subjects respected him. Some even loved him in their own way. Caius was fair in judgment, generous to those in need, relentless with anyone who threatened the realm. Under his leadership, Drakenshire prospered. But personally, Caius was hollow. He allowed no one too close. He kept courtiers at a polite distance. Women who tried to seduce him were met with glacial indifference. Even his counselors, who had known him since childhood, whispered that the king had become distant, unreachable. The only exception was Lucian, his beta. The man who had fought beside him in battles, guided him through difficult moments, and stayed loyal, even when Caius drowned in bitterness. "You cannot keep living like this," Lucian said one night, as they remained alone in the throne room after a long meeting with the council. "Living like what?" Caius asked, though he knew exactly what Lucian meant. "Alone, closed off. You will have to marry. The council has made that clear enough." Caius poured himself some wine, avoiding Lucian's gaze. And indeed they had. For 7 years, Caius managed to stall, delay, offer excuses. But recently, the council had run out of patience. They had chosen Diana, a noble woman from Valenmoor, and brought her to the castle with great ceremony. Diana was beautiful, Caius reluctantly admitted that. Long golden hair cascading in waves to her waist, blue eyes like summer skies, refined posture, and the poise of a true lady. She would make a suitable queen, an appropriate wife. But Caius felt nothing when he looked at her. "The council wants a decision," Caius said. "And I need to travel to the Northern Kingdom to finalize those trade treaties. When I return—" He paused, the words heavy on his tongue. "When I return, I will announce my engagement to Diana." Lucian nodded slowly. "I will keep the castle in order during your absence." "I know you will. That's why I'm leaving everything in your hands while I am away." Caius placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You are the only one I trust completely, Lucian. The castle, the kingdom. Everything will be under your protection until I return." Lucian nodded. The trip to the Northern Kingdom took 2 weeks. The negotiations went well. The agreements were signed, alliances strengthened. Caius fulfilled his role as king with the perfection everyone expected of him. But throughout the entire journey, through every meeting and every formal dinner, there was an emptiness in his chest nothing could fill. As if an essential part of him had been torn away 7 years ago and never returned. On the journey back, when night fell and his guards suggested they seek shelter, Caius agreed. There was a nearby village, small but seemingly prosperous, with lights glowing in windows and music floating through the air. "There," Caius said, pointing to a particularly lively tavern. "We will spend the night." His guards followed in silence, accustomed to a king who rarely smiled, but always knew exactly what to do. When Caius pushed open the tavern door, he was greeted by a wave of warmth, the smell of food and ale, and the buzz of lively conversation. It was the kind of place he rarely visited, too common for a king, but tonight he did not care. "A beer," he told the man behind the counter, tossing a coin. Caius found a seat in a corner where he could observe the room without drawing too much attention. His guards spread out, some staying close, others blending with the locals. His beer arrived, cold and refreshing. Caius took a sip, allowing himself to relax for the first time in weeks. Then the music changed. A slower, more sensual rhythm filled the air. Conversations quieted as people turned toward the small stage. The dancers entered. 5 women wearing outfits that left little to the imagination, their movements graceful and rehearsed. The customers clapped, whistled, enchanted. Caius barely paid attention at first. He had seen dancers before, at royal feasts far more elaborate than this. But then one particular figure caught his eye, and his entire world stopped. It could not be. It was not possible. But there she was, Alyssa. Dancing at the center of the stage, her movements breathtaking, her body even more stunning, her face, the face that had haunted his dreams for 7 long years. The beer in his mouth was spat out involuntarily, spraying across the table and hitting a nearby man's cup. "Hey, watch it," the man complained, but Caius barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on Alyssa. She had not yet seen him, fully immersed in the dance, her hips swaying hypnotically, her arms rising above her head as she spun. By all that is... Caius murmured, unable to finish the thought. To his left, 2 men spoke loudly, clearly drunk. The one in the middle is new, right? One of them said, pointing shamelessly at Alyssa. Yeah, started about 2 years ago. And what a woman, my friend. What a woman. I've tried to get close to her 3 times. She always turns me down. Polite, but firm. You and half the men in this village. The other laughed. But who can blame them? Just look at her. Worth the attempt. Caius's hands clenched into fists. The idea of other men trying to touch Alyssa, making offers, whispering promises. But then he remembered. She had betrayed him. She had run off with another man. She had taken money and vanished without looking back. She was no longer his. She had never truly been his. But then why was his heart pounding like this? Why did every fiber of his being scream for him to cross the room, climb onto that stage, and drag her away from all those eyes? Then Alyssa looked his way, and their eyes met across the smoky tavern. He saw recognition strike her like lightning. Her face paled, her movements faltering for a split second. But she did not run. Instead, she kept dancing. But now something in her movements had changed. A new intensity. A deliberate provocation. She danced, looking straight at him, her eyes never leaving his, as if she were saying something only the 2 of them could hear. Caius could not move, could not breathe. He was trapped in that moment, in that stare, in that connection that 7 years of distance had failed to erase. The men beside him kept chattering, but their voices sounded far away. Look how she moves. Never seen anything like it. I bet under those clothes she's even more. Careful, Caius said, his voice low and dangerous. Finish that sentence and you lose your tongue. The 2 men turned, finally noticing the authority radiating from him, the royal posture no common clothes could hide. So sorry, sir, one of them stammered before they both scurried off. Caius looked back at Alyssa. She was still dancing, still holding that devastating eye contact. The music was ending. He could feel it, and part of him wished it would last forever. But then the music stopped. Alyssa held her final pose for a second that felt like eternity, her chest rising and falling with her breath, her eyes locked on his. Then she ran. The instant the music fully died, Alyssa spun around and bolted off stage, disappearing through a side door so quickly that the other dancers froze, confused. Stay here, Caius ordered his guards, his voice sharp as steel. He wanted no witnesses for what was about to happen. No one follows me. That is an order. Caius rose and pushed toward the side door, but the tavern was crowded. Bodies blocked his path, drunk patrons bumped into him without recognizing him, and by the time he finally stepped into the dark night, Alyssa had already gained several seconds of distance. But Caius was a wolf, and wolves knew how to hunt. His eyes adjusted quickly to the darkness. There, in the distance, he saw a figure running toward the edge of the village, running as if her life depended on it. Caius followed in silence, keeping far enough not to alert her, but close enough never to lose sight. He watched her slip into a humble shack, little more than a hut, and shut the door quickly behind her. For a long moment, Caius simply stood there in the darkness, staring at the closed door. His heart pounded, a chaotic mix of anger, pain, desire, and something else he could not name. He drew a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside him. Then, with firm, determined steps, he walked to the door and knocked. The sound echoed through the silent night. 1 knock, 2, 3, and then the door opened. But it was not Alyssa who appeared. It was a boy around 7 years old with wild dark hair, curious eyes, and a fearless posture despite his small size. A boy who had the very same eyebrows as the late King of Drakenshire, and the very same eyes as him. The child's scent hit Caius like a blade, and the ground vanished beneath him. Chapter 3. The boy stared at him with fearless curiosity, his head tilted to the side in a way that made Caius's heart clench painfully. He knew that gesture. He had seen his own father do it 1,000 times when he was evaluating something, thinking deeply. "Can I help you, sir?" Ivor asked, his voice clear and polite despite the late hour. Caius opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely frozen, staring at that young face where fragments of his own bloodline were reflected with a clarity impossible to deny. Caius finally found his voice, though it sounded hoarse even to his own ears. "I need to speak with Alyssa." Ivor frowned, studying the stranger more closely. There was something about the man that unsettled him, but it was not fear. It was a strange feeling, like recognizing someone he had never actually seen before. "Mom," he shouted, turning back into the shack. "There's someone here who wants to talk to you." Caius heard movement inside. Quick footsteps, the sound of something falling, a muffled exclamation. And then Alyssa appeared behind Ivor. Every trace of color had left her face. She was pale as the moon, her eyes wide with pure panic. Her legs almost gave out when she saw him standing there, so real, so close after 7 long years. For a moment, Alyssa thought she was dreaming, that this was just another of the nightmares that haunted her. But no, he was there, Caius, the king of Drakenshire, the father of her child, the man she had never stopped loving. Caius. His name left her lips like a broken sob. He stepped forward, moving into the faint light spilling from inside the shack, and Alyssa watched his gaze travel over the humble interior of the home, then drop to Ivor, still standing in the doorway. "He is my son." It was not a question. It was a statement, cold and sharp as steel. Tears began streaming down Alyssa's face instantly. 7 years. 7 years keeping this secret, this precious boy who was half her and half the man she had loved. And now that man was here, staring at Ivor with an expression she could not fully read. "Please," Alyssa began, her voice shaking violently. "Please do not." But Caius was already looking directly at Ivor again, studying each feature, each detail. "How old are you, boy?" "7, sir," Ivor answered, frowning at the tension in the air. 7. Caius repeated the word, and something flickered in his eyes. Pain, anger, recognition. "And your name?" "Ivor." "Ivor." The way Caius spoke the name was almost reverent, but there was such an intense current of emotion beneath it that the air itself felt charged. Alyssa could no longer hold herself together. She fell to her knees right there in the doorway, tears now running freely, her sobs tearing through the night. "Please," she begged, her hands clasping together in desperate supplication. "Please, Caius, do not take him from me. Please, I am begging you. You can hate me, you can do whatever you want to me, but do not take my son. He is all I have. Everything. Please." Ivor went completely still as he watched his mother cry like that. His mother was strong. She was his rock, his shield. But now she was on her knees, begging a stranger, and the fear Ivor felt was visceral. "Mom." His voice came out small, frightened. He ran to her, throwing himself into her arms, and Alyssa clutched him with desperate strength, as if she could protect him through sheer force of will. "It is all right, my love," she whispered through her sobs, even though she knew it was a lie. "It is all right." But Ivor looked at the tall man watching them, and instinctively knew nothing was all right. "Who is he?" Ivor asked, his voice trembling. "Why are you crying?" Why did you tell him not to take me away from you?" Alyssa could not answer. She was crying too hard, shaking too much. It was Caius who spoke, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Because I am your father, and you are coming with me." The world seemed to stop. Ivor froze in Alyssa's arms, his eyes widening as he tried to process those words. "My father?" he repeated, looking between Alyssa and Caius. "No," Alyssa sobbed. "Please, Caius. He is just a child." "Please." "A king's son," Caius said, his voice still cold, but with something else underneath, something struggling to surface. "My son will not live like this. In this misery, with a mother who dances in taverns for drunk men." The cruelty in the words made Alyssa flinch, as if she had been physically struck. Ivor, however, felt only anger. Anger at seeing his mother like that. Anger at hearing this stranger, this supposed father, speak of her that way. "My mother is not bad," he shouted, pulling away from Alyssa and planting himself between her and Caius, fists clenched. "She takes care of me. She works hard so I can eat. She is the best mother in the world." Caius looked at the boy, at that fierce courage in someone so small, and felt something shift inside his chest. Pride, admiration, a father's love awakening for the first time. "I am sure she is," Caius said, his voice softening just a fraction. "But that does not change the facts. You are my son, heir of Drakenshire, and your place is in the castle, not here." "I am not going anywhere," Ivor declared, though tears now shimmered in his own eyes. "I am not leaving my mother." "Ivor." Alyssa tried to pull him back, but he resisted. "No, Mom, he does not get to command us. I do not care if he is a king or whatever he is." The boy's bravery, even as fear trembled through him, made Caius take a step forward, then another, until he stood right in front of Ivor, looking down at that young face that mirrored so much of his own. "Are you afraid?" Caius asked quietly. "Yes," Ivor admitted, his chin trembling. "But I will not let you hurt my mother." "And if I promised I would not hurt her? Why would I believe you? I do not even know you." Caius slowly knelt, lowering himself to Ivor's eye level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. This was his son, his flesh and blood. A piece of himself he had never known existed. "You are right," Caius said, his voice losing some of its hardness. "You do not know me, and I do not know you, but that is going to change, because you are my son, Ivor. And I have always dreamed of having a son as brave and fearless as you." Ivor blinked, confused by the shift in tone. "Dreamed?" "Yes. Someone who would defend what he loves. Someone strong and loyal." Caius reached out, hesitantly resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Someone exactly like you." "I do not understand." Tears now streamed down Ivor's face. "Why do you want to take me away?" "Because you deserve more than this." Caius gestured around the shack. "You deserve education, training, a life worthy of who you are. You deserve to know your heritage, your people, your kingdom." "But what about my mother?" Caius looked at Alyssa, still on her knees and trembling. "She can come with us." Ivor turned quickly to his mother. "Mom, are we going?" Alyssa could not speak. She was caught between the terror of losing her son and the dread of returning to the castle to face everything waiting there. Caius stood and pulled Ivor into his arms in an embrace that surprised all three of them. The boy stiffened at first, but then relaxed, sensing something strange yet comforting in the strength of those arms around him. "You are my son," Caius murmured into Ivor's hair. "And I will take care of you. I promise." When he pulled back, there were tears in Caius's own eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. He looked at Alyssa again, and his voice returned to its royal firmness. "He is coming with me. At dawn. And you may accompany him if you wish to be present in your son's life. But understand this, Alyssa. I will never allow him to live here again. This life is over for him." "And if I refuse?" Alyssa asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then I will take him anyway. I am the king. He is my heir. I have every right to claim him." Caius paused. "But I know you love him, and he clearly loves you. I do not wish to deprive him of his mother. The decision, however, is yours." It was not truly a choice. It was a sentence. "I will go," Alyssa whispered, defeated. "Wherever he goes, I go." Caius nodded, something that might have been relief flickering briefly in his eyes. "At dawn, then. Be ready." The journey back to Drakenshire was a 3-day trip that Alyssa spent in a dazed fog. Ivor, despite his initial fear, gradually became fascinated by the adventure, bombarding Caius with questions about the castle, about werewolves, about everything. And Caius, to Alyssa's surprise, answered with patience, sometimes even with tenderness. With her, however, he maintained that icy distance. He barely spoke to her, barely looked at her. It was as if she were merely an unavoidable accessory brought along solely because their son loved her. When, on the 3rd day, the towers of Drakenshire finally appeared on the horizon, Alyssa felt her stomach twist. There it was. The castle she had fled. The place of so many painful, precious memories. "It is huge!" Ivor exclaimed, practically bouncing in his saddle. "Father, is that really where you live?" "Where we live," Caius corrected, and Alyssa noticed how he emphasized the we. "From now on." The gates opened as they approached, guards bowing as they recognized their king. Caius rode through them with the natural authority of one born to rule, and Alyssa followed, feeling the curious eyes of servants and soldiers on her. When they dismounted in the main courtyard, Lucian was waiting there, and his eyes widened when he saw Alyssa. "My king," he began, clearly confused. "We were not expecting—" "Lucian," Caius cut in, placing a hand on Ivor's shoulder beside him. "This is Ivor, my son." The beta froze, looking between Caius the boy and Alyssa. Understanding and shock flashed quickly across his features. "Your son?" "Yes. Take them to the chambers in the East Wing, the best available. Make sure they have everything they need." "Yes, my king." Caius knelt in front of Ivor one more time. "Go with Lucian. He will show you your new rooms. I have matters to attend to, but I will see you soon." "Do you promise?" Ivor asked, already forming an attachment to the father he had just met. "I promise." Caius touched his son's cheek gently before rising. His eyes met Alyssa's for a brief moment, and she saw there a violent storm of emotions he was barely containing. Then he looked away, back to Lucian. "Once they are settled, summon the council. An urgent meeting. I have something important to announce." "Yes, my king." As Lucian led Alyssa and Ivor through the familiar corridors, the boy did not stop talking, amazed by everything. But Alyssa barely heard him. She was back, in the castle, and everything was about to change again. The chambers were magnificent. A large main bedroom with a massive bed, a smaller adjoining room for Ivor, a sitting area with fireplaces and fine furniture she had never dared to touch when she was just a servant. "This is for us?" Ivor asked, incredulous. "Yes," Lucian replied kindly. "All yours. If you need anything, just ask any servant." After he left, Ivor explored every corner, touching everything with reverent awe. But eventually he noticed that Alyssa was sitting in silence, staring at her hands. Mom, you are not happy? Alyssa pulled him into her arms, kissing his head. I am happy for you, my love. Very happy. And it was true. But she was also terrified of what was coming. The council chamber was full when Caius entered. The elders were already seated, Maddox among them, and all of them looked curious about the reason for such an urgent summons. My king, the eldest counselor began, what matter of such importance demands our presence immediately upon your return? Caius stood before them, hands clasped behind his back, his posture entirely regal. I discovered something during my journey, something that will change Drakkenshire's future. He paused, letting the tension build. I have an heir. Silence reigned for 3 heartbeats. Then voices erupted. An heir? But, Your Majesty, you are not married. Diana has not yet. How could you have— Silence. Caius's voice sliced through the chaos. I have not finished. The counselors fell quiet, though many exchanged worried looks. I have a son, born 7 years ago. His name is Ivor, and he is now residing in the castle. Maddox had gone completely pale. His eyes widened in dawning comprehension and panic as he did the math in his head. 7 years, one counselor murmured. Then he was born around the time of your coronation? Exactly. He was conceived before my father's death. And the mother? Another asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected. Alyssa. Some of you may remember her. She worked here as a servant. The room exploded again in whispers. Maddox looked as if he might faint. My king, he began, his voice shaking. Surely you are not considering. I am declaring Ivor as my son and son of my blood, Caius said firmly. He will be raised here, receive proper education, combat training, everything a prince requires. But he is a bastard, one of the younger counselors protested. Born out of wedlock, by the laws of Drakkenshire, a bastard cannot inherit the throne. Caius felt rage boiling inside him, but kept his face a mask of control. I am aware of the law. Then your majesty knows that even as your blood, he has no succession rights, another elder added, his tone gentler but no less firm. The law is clear. Only children born of legitimate unions may inherit. The law was made by men, Caius said, his voice dangerously low, and it can be changed by men. Altering succession laws requires full council approval, Maddox said quickly, regaining his composure. And I must say, Your Majesty, it would be extremely difficult to obtain such approval. Traditions exist for a reason. Caius fixed him with a stare so intense the counselor flinched. Ivor is my son, my blood, and he will be treated with every respect and privilege that position deserves, regardless of what the law currently says about succession. That is not up for debate. No one is suggesting otherwise, Your Majesty, the eldest counselor said. The boy may certainly live in the castle, receive education, be recognized as your son, but regarding the line of succession, he shook his head. Until you marry and have legitimate heirs, the question of succession remains complicated. You have Diana, another counselor added, a perfect bride. Marry her, have legitimate children, and the matter resolves itself. Caius's hands clenched into fists behind his back. Technically, they were right. The law was on their side. But every part of him rebelled at the idea that Ivor, his son, his flesh and blood, could not inherit what was rightfully his. This discussion is not over, he said, his voice icy. I will find a way to change those laws. And you would do well to remember that I am the king. My will should not be so easily dismissed. No one is dismissing your majesty's will, Maddox replied smoothly, though there was a triumphant glint in his eyes that made Caius want to strangle him. We are merely reminding you of the legal realities that govern our realm." Caius looked around the room, seeing resistance on every face. They would not yield easily. Perhaps they would not yield at all. But he was the king, and he would find a way. "This meeting is over," he declared abruptly. "You are all dismissed." The counselors rose and bowed before filing out, but Caius could already hear their whispers as soon as they were beyond the chamber doors. Lucian, his beta, later asked what he intended to do to make everyone accept Ivor as legitimate heir. "I do not need their acceptance," Caius answered. "I will declare it. Ivor is my blood, my son, my heir, and whoever dares question that will have no place in Drakenshire." Chapter 4. The first days in the castle were a strange mix of wonder and torment for Alyssa. Ivor was absolutely enchanted by everything. He woke before dawn, racing around their chambers to explore every corner, running his hands over the fine furniture as if it were treasure, peering out the window at the courtyard where the knights trained. To him, it was a dream made real, an adventure straight out of the stories Alyssa used to tell before bed. But for Alyssa, every corridor was a memory. Every stone held a fragment of the past she had tried so desperately to forget. There was the side staircase where Caius had cornered her for the first time, stealing a kiss that had left her breathless. There was the little alcove where they had hidden one night when a guard passed too close. And there, that corridor leading to the gardens, where he had taken her beneath the moonlight and whispered promises that had sounded eternal. "Mom, can we go explore?" Ivor tugged at her hand on the third day, his eyes shining with excitement. Alyssa forced a smile. "Of course, my love." They walked through the corridors, Ivor occasionally running ahead to admire a suit of armor, a tapestry, a window overlooking the distant mountains. Alyssa followed more slowly, feeling the weight of the gazes that tracked them. The servants watched. They whispered to one another when they thought Alyssa was not paying attention. "That is her," a maid murmured to another as they passed. "The tavern dancer the king brought back. I heard she seduced him years ago. Got pregnant on purpose to trap him. Poor Lady Diana. Imagine having to share the castle with that." The words cut like knives, but Alyssa kept her face neutral, unreadable. She could not show weakness, not here. Not where everyone seemed to be waiting for her to fail, to prove she was exactly what they thought of her. It was during one of these walks that Alyssa overheard the conversation that hurt the most. She was passing by a group of court ladies gathered in one of the smaller halls. Ivor had run ahead to look at the gardens through a large window, so Alyssa was momentarily alone when their voices reached her. "Lady Diana truly is the most beautiful woman in all the kingdoms," one of them was saying, her tone reverent. "Hair like molten gold, eyes like sapphires, a true queen." "And so kind as well," another added. "No wonder the king chose her. I cannot imagine how she must feel with that woman in the castle. If it were me, I would not bear it. But Lady Diana is far too well bred to show it. She has class, something a mere servant will never have." Alyssa felt tears burn her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She had no right to feel wounded by such words. They were right, after all. Diana was everything Alyssa could never be. Noble, elegant, suitable to stand at a king's side. "Mom," Ivor called to her from the gardens. "Come see! There are swans on the lake." Alyssa forced her feet to move, to carry her away from those cruel voices, and went to her son, who was pointing excitedly at the white birds gliding gracefully across the water. But the words remained, echoing in her mind. And for the first time since arriving, Alyssa seriously wondered if she had made a mistake. Perhaps she should have refused to come. Perhaps she should have let Caius take Ivor alone. At least then she would not have to face, day after day, the reality that she was back in the place where she had been both happiest and most miserable, In the village, she had freedom. She had her dancing, which she loved even if it was in a tavern. She had the joy of returning home and finding Ivor waiting for her, just the two of them against the world. Here, she was merely tolerated. "You are sad," Ivor said suddenly, looking up at her with eyes far too perceptive for his age. "No, my love. Just tired. You do not like it here." It was not a question. Ivor knew his mother too well to be fooled. "I like seeing you happy," Alyssa answered honestly, "and you are happy here." "But you are not." Alyssa knelt, cupping her son's face between her hands. "My happiness is wherever you are. Always." Ivor hugged her tightly, and Alyssa closed her eyes, letting that pure, unconditional love strengthen her. For him, she would endure anything. Even this. Diana was in the gardens when she decided she needed answers. For 3 days, rumors had raced through the castle like wildfire. The king had a son. A woman from his past had returned. Everything was changing, and no one seemed willing to give her a straight explanation. She found Caius in the library, studying old documents with such intensity that a frown had settled permanently on his brow. "Your Majesty," she said softly, and Caius looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Lady Diana." "I did not hear you come in. Forgive the intrusion." Diana closed the door behind her, an action that made Caius raise an eyebrow. "But I need to speak with you about the rumors." Caius sighed, shutting the book he had been reading. "I imagine you do." "It is true, then? You have a son?" "Yes." There was no reason to deny it. "Ivor, he is 7 years old. And his mother is here, in the castle." "Yes." Diana took a few steps forward, her hands clasped neatly in front of her in a perfectly proper posture. "I must ask, Your Majesty, do you still love her?" The question caught him off guard. Caius fell silent for a long moment, wrestling with emotions he had tried to bury deep. "I loved her," he said at last, his voice careful. "Long ago. Deeply. And now?" "Now." Caius rose and walked to the window. "Now I know she is an opportunist who used me. Who ran off with another man when she got what she wanted." Diana frowned. "Then why bring her back?" "For Ivor. He is my son, my blood, and he loves his mother. I did not want to deprive him of her." "But you believe she betrayed you?" "Yes." "Based on what?" Diana pressed. "Have you spoken to her, given her a chance to explain? Or are you drawing conclusions based on what others told you?" Caius turned to face her, surprised by the sharpness of the question. "She asked for money to go see another man and disappeared. That is not a conclusion. That is fact. Circumstances matter, Your Majesty. They always matter." Diana stepped closer. A desperate woman can do things a safe woman would never do, especially if she is protecting something or someone. The implication was clear, and Caius felt something stir in his chest. Doubt. Possibility. "Why are you defending her?" "I am not defending anyone. I am simply suggesting that perhaps there is more to the story than you know." Diana paused. "And now I must ask the obvious question. What happens to our engagement?" Caius looked at her, this beautiful, kind woman chosen to be his queen, and felt nothing. Admiration, perhaps. Respect for the intelligence she clearly possessed, but nothing like the fire Alyssa used to ignite in his veins. "Nothing changes," he said automatically. "You will be my queen. The wedding will happen as planned." "And Ivor?" she asked. "Where does he fit into all this?" "He is my son. He will be raised here given everything a prince deserves. But you will be my wife, the queen. Our children will be the heirs." The words sounded hollow even to Caius's own ears, but he did not know what else to say. Diana nodded slowly, though her eyes made it clear she was not entirely convinced. "I understand. Thank you for your honesty, Your Majesty." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Just one last thing, if I may." "Yes?" "Do not let pride or anger blind you to the truth, whatever that truth may be." Diana looked back at him over her shoulder. "Sometimes appearances deceive, and sometimes the people we hurt most are the ones who least deserved it." Then she left, leaving Caius alone with turbulent thoughts and questions he was not sure he wanted answered. That night, after putting Ivor to bed, Alyssa felt the walls of their chambers closing in around her. Her entire body was tense, her emotions a chaotic storm threatening to crush her. She needed to release it. She needed to let all that pressure out somehow before she exploded. Without thinking too much, Alyssa went to the small bag where she kept her few belongings from the village and pulled out her dancing clothes. The fabric was thin, revealing. Nothing a respectable woman would wear inside a royal castle. But Alyssa did not feel respectable. She felt trapped, desperate, lost. She slipped into the clothes, feeling the familiar brush of the material against her skin. Then she closed her eyes and imagined the music. That slow, sensual melody that used to play at the tavern. The one that made men stop drinking just to watch. And she began to dance. At first, her movements were stiff, restricted by tension. But slowly, as she lost herself in the imagined music, her body loosened. Her hips swayed in rhythm. Her arms flowed through the air like water. Her head tipped back in total abandon. She was not dancing for an audience. She was dancing for herself, to release all the pain and confusion, and unresolved longing burning her from the inside. That was why she did not notice Caius standing at the slightly open door. He had come to check how Ivor was settling in. Or at least that was what he told himself. But when he reached their chambers and saw the door cracked open, when he glanced through the gap and saw Alyssa dancing, Caius froze. She was breathtaking. More than breathtaking. It was like watching temptation itself take form, like seeing a dream made flesh. The clothes she wore left little to the imagination, but that was not what held him there. It was the way she moved, the raw emotion pouring out of every gesture, the naked vulnerability she would never allow anyone to see while fully awake. His body reacted instantly, desire blazing through his veins like liquid fire. He should leave. He should close the door and walk away before she saw him. But he could not move his feet. He could not look away. 7 years. 7 years since he had seen her like this, lost in motion, completely free. And it was as if no time had passed at all, as if they were still those two young lovers stealing forbidden moments. Alyssa spun, and that was when she finally saw Caius. Her eyes widened, and for a heartbeat she froze. Caius expected her to stop, to rush to cover herself, to shout at him for invading her privacy. But Alyssa did none of that. Instead, keeping her gaze locked on his, she kept dancing. The air between them turned electrically charged. She was dancing for him now, only for him, and they both knew it. Every movement was a provocation, a question, a challenge. Caius felt his breathing quicken, his heart hammering against his ribs. His hands were balled into fists at his sides, fighting the overwhelming urge to cross the room, pull her into his arms, and... The imagined music ended. Alyssa stopped, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths, her eyes still locked on his. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Only then did Caius realize his mouth was slightly open, that he was looking at her like a man completely bewitched. He probably looked dazed, lost, entirely under her spell. And maybe he was. His voice came out rough. Forgive me, I should not. I am sorry. Then, before he could do something even more foolish, Caius turned and practically fled down the corridor, his hurried footsteps echoing off the stone. When he reached his own chambers, he slammed the door and leaned his back against it, his breathing still uneven. What in the hell is wrong with me? He muttered to the empty room. 7 years since she had supposedly used his love in such a calculated way. 7 years building walls around his heart, promising himself he would never again be so foolish. And a few minutes watching her dance had been enough to make everything threaten to crumble. He still wanted her. Even after she had betrayed him, even with Diana waiting to become his queen, even knowing how utterly wrong it was, he still desired her, with an intensity that bordered on painful. You are pathetic, he told himself, pushing away from the door and walking to the window. But even as he stared out into the dark night, all he could see was Alyssa. Dancing, moving, looking straight at him with those eyes that seemed to see through every defense he had ever built. In her own chambers, Alyssa sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. What had she done? Why had she kept dancing when she saw him? Why had she not stopped, covered herself, behaved like any sensible woman would? But she knew why, even if she did not want to admit it. Because part of her wanted him to see her like that, wanted to remind him of what they had shared, of the fire that had once burned between them. Wanted to provoke him, to make him feel at least a fraction of the desperate desire that still consumed her. It was wrong, terribly wrong. But her heart, her traitorous body, did not seem to care about logic or reason. Alyssa lay down, pulling the blankets over herself, as if they could protect her from her own thoughts. This is madness, she whispered into the darkness. Complete madness. But even knowing that, even understanding she was playing with fire, she could not entirely regret those moments. Seeing him look at her that way again, desire and conflict warring in his eyes. At least now she knew he was not completely indifferent. That beneath all that coldness and resentment, there were still embers of what had once been a consuming blaze. And Alyssa did not know whether that comforted or terrified her. Probably both. 2 days passed in tense silence. Caius avoided Alyssa's chambers, though he spent time with Ivor in other parts of the castle. Alyssa kept herself busy caring for her son, exploring the castle less, trying to make herself invisible. But fate, as always, had other plans. It was mid-afternoon when Ivor was having his sword lesson. The master-at-arms was teaching him a particularly tricky move, a defense against overhead attacks. Like this, the man demonstrated. You block with the sword at an angle, then turn to... But the wooden sword was worn, invisible cracks weakening its structure. When Ivor tried the move, the wood snapped, and a sharp piece flew toward his body. He tried to dodge, but he was not fast enough. The wood slashed his stomach, a deep cut that began bleeding immediately. Ivor screamed, more from surprise than from pain, and clapped his hand to his belly. When he saw the blood on his fingers, panic hit. Mom! Alyssa, who had been watching from a distance, felt her heart stop. She ran faster than she had ever run, reaching Ivor's side in seconds. Let me see, she said, trying to keep her voice calm, though terror was roaring inside her. The cut was deep, blood running down Ivor's abdomen and staining his clothes. It did not look life-threatening, but it was ugly, and needed attention immediately. Come on. Alyssa scooped him up in her arms, even though he was really too big for that, and began running toward their chambers. It is going to be all right, my love. It is going to be all right. But tears were already streaming down her face as she ran, panic taking over. Someone call the healer, she shouted to the watching servants. Now! When she reached their rooms, she laid Ivor carefully on the bed and grabbed clean cloths to press against the wound. "It hurts, Mom," Ivor whimpered, and seeing her brave boy like that, so vulnerable and scared, shattered Alyssa's heart into 1,000 pieces. "I know, my love. I know. But the healer will be here soon, and she will make you better again." The door burst open and Caius strode in like a storm. Someone must have told him about the accident. "What happened?" he demanded, his eyes going straight to Ivor on the bed. "The sword broke during training," Alyssa said, her voice shaking. "It cut his abdomen. I have already sent for the healer." Caius crossed the room in 2 strides, looking at the wound with a tense expression. "Let me see." Alyssa pulled the cloth back carefully, revealing the cut that was still bleeding. Caius grimaced. "That cut is deep. The body will not heal that on its own." "I know." More tears slid down Alyssa's face. "Where is the healer? Why is she not here yet?" "She is on her way." Caius rested his hand on Ivor's shoulder. "You are all right, son. You are going to have a scar worthy of a warrior." Ivor tried to smile, but the movement made the cut throb and he groaned. That was when Alyssa really began to fall apart. Sobs came in heavy waves, her whole body shaking as she clung to Ivor's hand. "Forgive me," she cried. "Forgive me, my love. I should have been closer. I should have." "Alyssa." Caius's voice was firm. "This was not your fault. He is just a child. He could have been hurt so much worse." "But he was not." Caius set his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Breathe. He is going to be fine." But Alyssa could not stop crying. All the tension of the past days, all the fear and anxiety and desperate love pouring out at once. Without thinking, Caius pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his chest. It was the first time he had held her like that since finding her again, and the sensation was both familiar and unsettling. Her scent hit him in a rush. That unique smell that was only hers, which neither years nor distance had erased from his memory. It was stronger now, intensified by emotion and panic, and it stirred something primal in Caius that made him want to roar. It was almost unbearable. Every instinct he had screamed for him to hold her tighter, bury his face in her hair, mark her as his in every way possible. But Ivor was right there, and the healer was on her way, and this was wrong on so many levels that Caius had lost count. Still, he could not let go. He could not release her, even knowing he should. The healer arrived, a gray-haired woman with skilled hands and a calm expression. "Let me see the boy," she said, and Caius gently eased Alyssa away. They stood side by side while the healer examined the wound, cleaned it with medicinal herbs, and began stitching the skin back together with small, precise stitches. Ivor squeezed Alyssa's hand through the entire process, trying to be brave, but unable to hold back a few tears. Caius kept one hand on Alyssa's shoulder, a gesture of comfort neither of them questioned in that moment. His fingers squeezed lightly every time Ivor winced, as if he could somehow transmit strength through his touch. "There," the healer finally said, stepping back to inspect her work. "He will have a scar, but a small one. Nothing a young warrior cannot wear with pride." "Thank you," Alyssa whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "He needs rest now, and keep the wound clean. I will return tomorrow to check on it." After the healer left, Ivor was already growing sleepy, the shock and pain of the stitches draining what energy he had left. "Sleep, my love," Alyssa said softly, stroking his hair. "I will be here when you wake up." "You promise?" Ivor murmured, his eyes already closing. "I promise." Within minutes, he was deeply asleep, his breathing slow and even. Caius and Alyssa remained by the bed, neither of them wanting to be the first to move, the first to step away. Caius's hand was still on her shoulder. And even now, with Ivor safe and resting, He could not bring himself to lower it. At last, Alyssa turned to look at him, and their faces were so close he could count every eyelash. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here." Caius should have said it was his duty, that Ivor was his son, so of course he would be there, that it meant nothing. But the words that came out were different. Always. Chapter 5. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft sound of Ivor's sleeping breaths. Caius and Alyssa were still side by side at the foot of the bed, neither of them wanting to be the first to step away, to break that fragile moment of truce. It was Caius who finally spoke, his voice low so as not to wake their son. "We need to talk." Alyssa felt her stomach tighten. She nodded, following him to the sitting area of the chambers, far enough from Ivor not to disturb him, but close enough to hear if he woke. Caius stood for a long moment, staring out the window at the gardens bathed in the light of late afternoon. When he finally turned to face her, there was something in his eyes Alyssa could not fully decipher. "Why did you leave with another man?" Alyssa blinked, confused. "What other man? What are you talking about? Do not pretend ignorance." Caius's voice was controlled, but there was an undercurrent of pain beneath it. "Maddox told me. He said you asked for money to run away with your true love, someone from your home village. What happened? Where is this man now? Did he abandon you?" All the color drained from Alyssa's face. There were so many accusations at once, but her understanding of what had really happened was beginning to take shape. "Caius, there was never another man." "Then why did you take the money? Why did you disappear without a word?" He had believed that lie for 7 long years, thinking she had betrayed him. "Because I was terrified," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And pregnant. And alone." Caius went utterly still. "Pregnant?" "Yes. I found out that day, the day your father died. I was going to tell you that night. I was so happy, Caius, so full of hope." She paused, the memory still raw even after all those years. "But then I heard the conversation. Your father talking to you, saying I was not suitable, that I would ruin the bloodline, that I would stain the crown's reputation. He begged you to forget me." Caius closed his eyes, remembering that conversation, remembering how he had dodged giving a direct answer, how he had been a coward when he should have defended their love. "And you heard all of it," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. Every word. I ran. I was crying in the corridors when Maddox found me." At the mention of the counselor's name, Caius's jaw tightened. "What did he say to you?" "That he already knew about the pregnancy, that he had spies watching me, that I was a threat to the kingdom's plans." The words poured out of her now. "He offered me the gold, said that, with all the chaos of the king's death, no one would notice my absence. And then he threatened me." "How?" "He said accidents happened all the time in the castle, and that it would be a shame if something happened to me or to the child I was carrying." The fury that flashed across Caius's face was so intense that Alyssa instinctively took a step back. "He threatened you and my son," Caius said, each word coming out like ice. "I was pregnant. I was scared." Alyssa was crying openly now. "What did you expect me to do? I had no guarantees, Caius. You were dealing with your father's death, your coronation, all the pressures of the kingdom. How was I supposed to know if you would protect me? If you would choose me over all of that? You should have trusted me." But the words rang hollow, because Caius knew she was right. In that moment, drowning in grief and responsibility, pulled in every direction, He did not know if he would have had the strength to fight everyone for her. I took the gold thinking of our child, Alyssa went on. Knowing I would need something to start with, to survive until I could work. I gave birth alone, Caius. Alone. No midwife, no healer. Every word was a knife in his heart. And when the money ran out, I went looking for work. The tavern hired me as a server, but the wages barely paid for our food. Then one of the dancers asked me to join their group. It paid 3 times more, enough to give Ivor real food. So you accepted, Caius said, and there was no judgment in his voice now, only painful understanding. Yes. I never slept with anyone. Never. You were the only one. Caius fell silent, processing every word, every revelation. The truth was assembling in his mind like the pieces of a terrible puzzle. Maddox had lied. He had manipulated them both. He had stolen 7 years from him with his son, 7 years with the woman he loved, all because of lies and fear. Caius? Alyssa's voice was small, frightened. Please, say something. But he could not speak. Rage was rising in his throat like bile, so intense he could barely control it, almost letting his wolf break free. Without a word, Caius turned and left the chambers, his quick, heavy footsteps echoing down the corridors. Alyssa stood there shaking, terrified that she had said the wrong thing, that she had made everything worse instead of better. Caius found Lucian overseeing the guards' evening training in the courtyard. Lucian. His voice was icy, controlled, but the beta knew him well enough to see the storm underneath. Summon the council. My king, it is already late. Perhaps in the morning. Now, Lucian. Caius looked at him, and there was something in his eyes that made the beta step back. Do not make me repeat myself. Yes, my king. Immediately. 20 minutes later, the council chamber was full. The elders looked confused and annoyed at being summoned at such an hour, but none of them dared complain openly. Maddox was among them, his face showing only mild curiosity, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. Caius swept into the room like a storm, and everyone rose at once. Sit, he ordered, his voice sharp. The counselors obeyed quickly. Caius stood before them, hands clasped behind his back, but everyone could see the tension in every line of his body. I discovered something tonight, he began, his voice dangerously calm. The elders exchanged nervous glances. 7 years ago, when my father died and I took the throne, a woman vanished from this castle. Alyssa. Maddox had gone visibly pale. What you do not know is that she did not leave of her own free will. The silence in the room was absolute. She was threatened. She was told that accidents would happen if she did not disappear, that she and the child she carried would be in danger. Caius paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Maddox. And then she was given gold and sent away. Your Majesty, one of the older counselors began. There must be some misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. Caius's voice cut like steel. And I am not finished, because after she left, terrified and alone, someone in this room came to me and told me a lie. An elaborate lie about how she had used me, how she had another man, how she had asked for money to run away with her true love. Every eye turned to Maddox, who was practically shaking now. For 7 years I believed that lie. 7 years thinking I had been betrayed, that I had been used. 7 years lost with my son because someone decided he knew better than I what was good for the kingdom. Caius took a step toward Maddox, and the older man instinctively backed away. Stand up, Caius ordered. Maddox rose on trembling legs, his usual arrogance completely gone. Your Majesty, I did everything for the good of the realm. I only did what your father asked. Your father, may his soul rest in peace, said himself that the girl was not suitable. You only decided to manipulate your king. Caius cut in, his voice so cold it seemed to freeze the air. You decided to threaten a pregnant, defenseless woman. You decided to lie to me about something that completely changed the course of my life. I was protecting the throne, protecting the bloodline. You were protecting your own power. Caius took another step, and Maddox all but cowered. Protecting your influence over a young king in mourning. And in the process, you destroyed lives. You stole 7 years of my life with my son. You forced my son's mother to live in poverty. The room was so silent that every breath could be heard. Your Majesty, please. Maddox fell to his knees. I was only trying to... Silence. The word cracked like a whip. I do not want to hear any more of your lies. Caius looked around the chamber at each face of the counselors who had served his father, and now served him. Maddox, as of this moment, you are no longer part of this kingdom. You are sentenced to immediate exile. You have until dawn to leave Drakenshire and never return. If you ever set foot on my lands again, you will be executed without trial. No, Maddox shouted. You cannot do this. I served your father for decades. I served this kingdom. Guards, Caius called, and 4 men entered at once. Escort the former counselor Maddox to his chambers. Allow him to gather his belongings, then take him beyond the gates. The guards seized Maddox by the arms, and the older man struggled briefly before realizing it was useless. You will regret this, he screamed as he was dragged away. You will see that I was right. That woman will destroy you. She will destroy everything. The door shut behind him, cutting off his shouts. Caius turned to the remaining counselors, all of them looking shocked and more than a little afraid. Does anyone else have something to say about my choices? He asked, his voice still deadly. Anyone else eager to decide my life for me? No one spoke. No one even dared breathe too loudly. Good. Then let me make something very clear. I will not tolerate any further interference in my personal life. I will not tolerate any more manipulation or lies. You are here to advise, not to control. And if anyone forgets that distinction, he will follow the same path as Maddox. Yes, Your Majesty, came the murmured replies around the room. One of the oldest counselors, Lord Heron, cleared his throat cautiously. My king, if I may ask, what do you intend to do now? With regard to Alyssa and young Ivor? Caius looked at him, and for the first time since entering the room, something other than anger appeared in his eyes. I am going to claim Alyssa. I am going to build my life at her side and at my son's side. I am going to do what I should have done 7 years ago. But Your Majesty, another counselor said hesitantly, what of Lady Diana? The engagement has already been announced publicly. You cannot simply break it off without consequences. The kingdom of Valenmore will be offended. No one will want to marry Diana after such a humiliation. There could even be political complications. War, you mean? Caius said bluntly. Yes, Your Majesty. That possibility exists. The weight of that reality crashed down on Caius like lead. He could not simply cancel the engagement without causing massive diplomatic problems. Diana did not deserve to be humiliated like that. And Valenmore was a powerful kingdom, an important alliance. That was when Lucian stepped forward, a shy but determined smile on his face. If I may, my king, I believe I have a solution. Every gaze turned to the beta. I will marry Lady Diana. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the voices exploded. You, a beta? The scandal would be... Silence, Caius commanded, but there was the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth now. Let Lucian speak. Lucian drew a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Lady Diana is my mate. We realized it the moment we saw each other, but since she was promised to Your Highness, We could not acknowledge that bond without causing a political disaster. The implications of what he was saying began to sink in. "You are mates?" Caius asked, genuine joy starting to shine in his eyes. "Yes, my king, and if you allow it, if you release her from the engagement, I will claim her at once. The kingdom of Valenmore will not be offended, because their daughter will still marry someone of high rank in Drakenshire. There will be no humiliation. And..." Lucian's smile widened. "Diana and I will finally be able to be together." Caius crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Lucian into a tight hug, laughing for the first time in days. "You magnificent idiot," he said, clapping his friend on the back. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" "Because she was promised to you. And I would never betray my king like that. I am so sorry for everything." "Loyalty badly placed, my friend." Caius stepped back, gripping Lucian by the shoulders. "This is the most welcome surprise I could have asked for. I am truly happy for you both. So, do I have your permission?" "Permission? You have my blessing." Caius laughed again. Go tell her right now." Lucian did not need to be told twice. He dashed out of the council chamber, leaving the elders murmuring among themselves about the unexpected turn of events. Lucian found Diana in her chambers, sitting by the window and gazing at the stars. She turned when he entered, and the smile that lit her face was like sunrise. "Lucian, what are you doing here?" He crossed the room and dropped to his knees before her, taking her hands in his. "We can be together. We can marry." Diana went completely still. "What?" "Caius found out the truth about Alyssa. He exiled Maddox, and he released you from the engagement. I believe your talk with him finally made that stubborn man come to his senses. You are so clever." Lucian kissed her hands, tears of joy already shining in his eyes. "Diana, I can finally make you mine, and I belong to you." Tears began to roll down her face as well. Lucian swept her into his arms and spun her around. "We are going to get married," he said, kissing her all over her face. "Right away. Tomorrow, if possible. I will not wait even one more day to make you my wife." Diana laughed through her tears. They kissed there, finally free to love openly, finally able to claim the mate bond they had discovered months before, but had been forced to keep secret. And as they held each other, 2 mates at last united. Fate, which had seemingly conspired to keep them apart, finally stepped aside and let them find their happiness. The next morning, Caius went to the chambers where Alyssa and Ivor were staying. He knocked softly before entering, finding Ivor already awake and cheerful, the wound on his belly covered with a clean bandage. "Dad!" Ivor jumped off the bed as soon as he saw him. Caius knelt and carefully examined the wound. "A mark of honor," he said with a smile. "But promise me you will be more careful in your next lessons." "I promise." Ivor hugged his father, and Caius hugged him back, holding his son with that fatherly love that grew stronger every day. But throughout the whole conversation, his gaze kept drifting to Alyssa. She stood near the window, wearing a simple but neat dress, her hair braided loosely. Every time their eyes met, there was a spark between them, a tension that thickened the air. "Ivor," Caius said at last, "why do you not go down to the stables? I asked the handlers to show you the new foals that were born." Ivor's eyes widened. "Can I?" "You can. But take a guard with you." Ivor left, buzzing with excitement, and suddenly Caius and Alyssa were alone. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said the night before, with all the truths that had come to light, with all the possibilities now opening before them. "Caius," Alyssa began, her voice hesitant. "About yesterday, Maddox has been exiled," Caius cut in. He will never return to Drakenshire. Alyssa stared at him, stunned. And I made it very clear to the council that I will not tolerate any further interference in my life. And Diana? The question slipped out before Alyssa could stop it. A smile touched Caius's lips. Diana is going to marry Lucian. They found out they are mates. Oh. Alyssa did not know what to feel. Relief, hope, fear. Caius took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough to touch. But he did not touch her. Not yet. I spent 7 years believing a lie, he said softly, building walls around my heart, convincing myself that love was weakness, that trust was foolish. Caius, but you never betrayed me. You were only trying to protect our son in the only way you knew how. Tears began to slide down Alyssa's cheeks. I am so sorry, she whispered. I am sorry I was not stronger, that I did not fight harder, that I let fear control me. And I am sorry I did not look for the truth, that I accepted Maddox's lies so easily because it was simpler than facing the pain. Caius finally touched her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. I lost years with you, with Ivor, years we will never get back. I know, she sobbed, but I will not lose any more. His voice was firm now, resolute. I will not let fear or pride or anything else take me away from you again. Alyssa looked up at him through her tears, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. What are you saying? I am saying, I want you, Alyssa. I want you at my side. I want to build a life with you and Ivor. I want... He paused, searching for the right words. I want to claim you as mine, before the entire kingdom. Alyssa's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. But the council, the laws, Ivor is still considered a bastard. Then I will change the laws. I will fight for Ivor's right to inherit, and I will fight for the right to have you as my mate. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers, his breath mingling with hers. Give me a chance, he whispered. A chance to fix everything I broke. A chance to be the man you and Ivor deserve. A chance to love you the way I should have loved you all along. Alyssa closed her eyes, tears still falling, but now they were tears of joy mixed with pain. She whispered back, Yes, Caius. And there, in chambers flooded with morning light, with their son happily exploring the stables outside, Caius finally kissed her. And it felt like coming home, like finding the missing piece of himself, like breathing for the first time after being underwater. Epilogue. 3 days had passed since Caius had revealed his true feelings. 3 days of stolen glances, of hands brushing briefly when no one was looking, of growing tension that threatened to consume them both. But Caius had a plan. He found her in the gardens, watching Ivor play with other young nobles. I need you tonight, he said quietly, coming up behind her. Alyssa turned, her heart racing at his tone. For what? It is a surprise. His eyes shone with something that made her stomach flip. Do you trust me? Yes, she answered without hesitation. A small smile touched his lips. Then, be ready at nightfall. I will use some pretext to get you out of the castle without arousing suspicion. Caius, what are you planning? You will see. He touched her face briefly, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with unshed tears. Just trust me. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Caius appeared in Alyssa's chambers. Ivor was already asleep, worn out from a whole day of lessons and play. Ready? Caius asked, holding out his hand. Alyssa took it, letting him guide her through the corridors. They used side passages, avoiding the main halls where courtiers might see them together. When they reached the stables, 2 horses were already saddled and waiting. "Where are we going?" Alyssa asked as he helped her mount. "To a place you know well. A place that was ours once, and will be ours again." Understanding struck her like lightning. The clearing. That secret patch of forest where they used to meet, where they had shared so many nights of love and promises. They rode in silence, the moon beginning to climb the sky. It was a full moon, its silvery light bathing everything in a mystical glow. When they finally reached the dense forest, Caius dismounted and helped Alyssa down, tying the horses before taking her hand again. The clearing opened before them, exactly as Alyssa remembered. Perhaps the trees were a little taller now, the undergrowth a little thicker, but essentially it was the same. The full moon lit it like a celestial stage, turning the grass to silver and the wildflowers into sparkling jewels. "Remember?" Caius asked softly. "How could I forget?" Alyssa whispered, tears already gathering in her eyes. "This is where I loved you for the first time under the full moon," Caius finished, turning fully to face her. "Where I swore you would be mine forever." He took a step forward, then another, until he was so close Alyssa could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I broke that promise," he went on, his voice rough with emotion. "Caius." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Tonight, here in this place, I want to make that vow again. But this time, the right way, the permanent way." Alyssa's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She knew what that meant. She knew the traditions of their kind. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the hesitant kisses of the past few days. It was pure fire, wild passion. 7 years of pent-up desire finally unleashed. Alyssa melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. His tongue slid into her mouth, teasing and demanding, and she met him with equal fervor, tasting him as if she were dying of thirst, and he were water. "I love you," Caius murmured against her lips. "I have always loved you. Even when I thought I hated you, it was love." "I love you too," Alyssa replied, kissing him again. "I never stopped, not for a single second." Caius lifted her as if she weighed nothing and laid her gently down on the soft moonlit grass. He hovered over her for a moment, just looking, just admiring. "You are so beautiful," he said, his voice full of reverence. "So perfectly beautiful." His hands began to remove the layers of clothing between them, slowly but deliberately. Every bit of exposed skin was worshipped with kisses, with touches that made Alyssa tremble. When they were finally skin to skin, Caius paused, looking deeply into her eyes. "Once I mark you, there is no going back," he said. "You will be mine forever, bound to me in ways that not even death can break." "I know." Alyssa touched his face, her heart so full it felt as if it might burst. With a deep groan that seemed to come from his very soul, Caius finally claimed her. Their bodies joined under the full moon, moving together in a rhythm as old as time itself. It was different from those stolen nights years ago. There was more depth now, more understanding of what they were doing, of what it meant. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss was a vow. Every movement drew them closer to that permanent union that went beyond the physical. "Mine," he whispered against her skin. "Finally. Completely mine." "And you are mine," Alyssa answered, pulling him into another kiss. 3 days later, the great hall of Drakenshire was full. Nobles from all over the kingdom had been summoned, along with representatives from allied realms. Alyssa was in her chambers, being prepared by handmaids who now treated her with cautious respect. She wore a gown of deep blue that made her eyes shine, her hair arranged in intricate braids threaded with silver ribbons. and around her neck, clearly visible, was the claim mark Caius had left. "Are you nervous?" Diana asked, stepping into the room. She and Lucian had married just 2 days earlier in a small, beautiful ceremony. "Terrified," Alyssa admitted honestly. "You do not need to be." Diana touched her shoulder gently. "You are his choice, and anyone with eyes can see you belong together. But you are the mother of his son. You are the woman he loves." Diana smiled. "That is all that matters." A servant knocked on the door. "It is time, my lady." Alyssa took a deep breath, smoothing the dress with trembling hands. "How do I look?" "Like a queen," Diana said sincerely. Together they walked through the corridors toward the great hall. The enormous doors were closed, and Alyssa could hear the low hum of voices on the other side. "Ready?" Diana asked. Alyssa nodded, unable to speak. The doors swung open. The hall fell instantly silent. Every eye turned to Alyssa as she entered, her head held high despite the fear inside her. She walked down the central aisle, passing faces that ranged from curious to hostile to genuinely pleased. At the far end of the hall, on a raised throne, sat Caius. He wore his full royal regalia, the crown upon his head, looking every inch the king he was. But when his eyes met hers, all Alyssa saw was the man who loved her. Beside him, on a smaller throne, sat Ivor. The boy wore noble clothes, looking like a little prince, though his eyes showed nerves at having so many people staring at him. Alyssa reached the end of the aisle, and Caius stepped down from his throne, holding out his hand to her. She took it, letting him lead her to the space between the two thrones. "Nobles of Drakenshire," Caius began, his voice echoing through the hall. "Thank you for coming today. I have called you all here to witness an announcement of great importance." He turned to Alyssa, taking both her hands in his. "7 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. I allowed lies and manipulation to separate me from the woman I loved. I lost precious years because of fear and pride, but no more." Caius lifted one of Alyssa's hands, making sure the mark on her neck was clearly visible. "This is Alyssa, mother of my son Ivor, and my claimed mate under the full moon, according to our traditions." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Caius went on, his voice rising above them. "I know some of you will question my choice. You will say that a queen should be of noble blood, raised in royal halls, well-versed in politics and etiquette." He paused, looking around the hall. "But I say this. Alyssa has proven her strength in ways most of you will never have to. She raised our son alone. She survived circumstances that would have broken weaker people. And she did it all with grace, dignity, and unconditional love." He turned back to Alyssa, his eyes shining with emotion. "She is stronger than any noble I have ever met, braver than many warriors, and more suited to stand at my side than any other woman in any kingdom." Caius faced the crowd again, his voice taking on that tone of absolute command. "As of this day, Alyssa is recognized as my Queen of Drakenshire, and anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me." The silence that followed was heavy. Then slowly, Lucian began to clap. Diana joined him. Then some of the guards who had watched Alyssa care for Ivor so devotedly. Then more and more people, until the entire hall was applauding. Caius crowned Alyssa right there, before everyone. The crown was delicate but beautiful, silver intertwined with moon-colored stones. As he set it upon her head, he whispered for her ears alone, "My queen, my Alyssa." Tears were flowing freely down her cheeks now, but they were tears of pure joy. "My king, my Caius." He kissed her then, before the whole kingdom, a kiss that sealed everything they had promised each other. When they parted, Caius reached out a hand for Ivor, who jumped down from the throne and ran into his parents' arms. The three of them embraced there, a family finally reunited, finally whole. "My son," Caius said aloud, holding Ivor against his chest. "Prince Ivor of Drakenshire, heir to the throne." That night, after the feasts and celebrations, Caius took Alyssa and Ivor to the castle's private gardens. The moon, still nearly full, bathed everything in silver light. "Look, Mom," Ivor pointed at the sky. "It is the same moon that is on your crown." Alyssa laughed, kneeling to be at eye level with him. "Yes, my love, it is." "Then you are Queen of the Moon," Ivor declared, with the simple logic of a child. "No," Caius said, sitting down on the grass and pulling them both into his arms. "Your mother is Queen of Drakenshire, and Luna of my heart." Ivor nestled between them, yawning. It had been a long, emotional day for a little boy. "Tell a story," he asked sleepily. "What kind of story?" Alyssa asked, stroking his hair. "About how you met. About when you fell in love." Caius and Alyssa exchanged a look over Ivor's head, and in each other's eyes they saw everything. The painful past, the precious present, the hopeful future. "Well," Caius began, his voice gentle, "once upon a time there was a foolish prince who did not have the courage to face his own fears and built a wall around his heart. He preferred to blame others rather than take responsibility for his own mistakes, until one day he understood that loving requires humility, and that love only begins where pride ends. And when he finally dared to reach into the puzzle of his own life, he discovered that the missing pieces were exactly the ones he had tried hardest to ignore. He just needed to find them, and have the courage to put them in the right place."